We're seeing more and more products combine AI capabilities with workflow builder products. From N8N to OpenAI's Agent Kit, we're seeing these products allow their users to define deterministic processes with non-deterministic capabilities that AI have. In our article, we go over all the ins and outs of how a workflow builder can be implemented. And let's start with the UI. So when you think of a workflow builder UI, you probably think of a canvas where users can add nodes and edges on demand. Nodes are usually actions that your workflow builder supports, and these can be third-party actions, like sending a Slack message, or an internal action that is unique to your product, such as calling an API or performing some type of action in your own product interface. In a workflow builder, you also have edges, which connect nodes and connect these actions, and usually signify the order of how actions should be executed or how data should flow. And so there might seem like there's a lot of moving pieces to get this Canvas app that can support different node and edge interactions, but there's actually plenty of helpful libraries, and one that we used is called ReactFlow. ReactFlow is a UI library that makes it really easy to implement this workflow builder style canvas to your React application. The team at XYFlow also supports SvelteFlow, which supports the Svelte framework. And so it's very easy to start putting together a workflow builder type application. You can get started by adding the ReactFlow component and specify the nodes, edges, different node types, as well as different interactions that you want to occur when nodes are added, edges are added, or connections between nodes and edges are added as well. From there, ReactFlow also supports custom styling, where for different node types, we're able to put our own Tailwind classes, as well as unique features about that node, such as where we want the connectors to be, whether we want it to be a source connector or a target connector, as well as any inputs that we might want from that node. With ReactFlow making a lot of the UI pieces easy, we can now focus on the actual data that our workflow needs to execute on. So when you think about a workflow, it's essentially a directed graph. If you don't remember what a directed graph is from your CS200 class, let's break it down. So the graph part of the directed graph is a way to model systems using nodes and edges. The directed part means that each of these edges have direction. A really good example is street maps. In street maps, you have locations, which are essentially nodes, and edges, which are the roads. Roads can be one-way or two-way, and these are the directed part of the edges in the graph. So when you use a product like Google Maps, it's essentially using a graph algorithm that is layered onto a directed graph, where it's trying to find the shortest path between nodes given a set of edges with direction. And so knowing all of that, back to our workflow builder example, when you think of a workflow builder, you have nodes, which are your actions, and you also have these edges, which have direction because generally you have your first node, which is a trigger. When that node gets triggered, data will flow to subsequent nodes. Maybe there's some branching logic, but your edges usually signify the order of how actions should be executed, and as well as how data should flow. So the reason why we're talking about directed graphs are when you're executing a workflow, you need to keep track of node data as well as have some sort of algorithm that executes the overall workflow for your users. And so when thinking about node data, which we can also think of as state, each individual action or node in your workflow builder should keep some type of state. And so with a workflow builder type application, ReactFlow isn't enough. ReactFlow sets the UI, but we also need a way to store state changes when node data inevitably changes. And so in our example, we're using Zustand, which is a client-side state management that lets us keep track of data for each individual node. So anytime a node is added or a node is executed, we can keep track of that data client-side. So while we keep some node data client-side, like the inputs to a form that a node needs, such as if you have a send Slack message node in your workflow builder and you want users to be able to specify the message, that might be an input that you want to keep track of client-side. But when you're actually executing that action with the Slack API, you want to do that on your backend. So that's where we get into workflow execution. Your workflow builder in your backend should use some graph algorithm to be able to traverse nodes and perform actions on them sequentially. In our example, we have a trigger node that occurs whenever our Slack app is mentioned. From there, we have 3 child nodes that need to be executed right after that trigger. And from there, after all 3 actions are taken, we can finally aggregate all of that data into a send message step at the very end. So here we're using a breadth first search algorithm where we're first traversing the first level and then making sure that node is executed. From there, the second level where we have 3 nodes there, we execute each one before reaching that last level. And so your workflow engine can use breadth first search, depth first search, whatever works for your use case. And in your engine, you might also want to implement retries, queues, and different things depending on the complexity. Now let's talk about what's going to be unique for your workflow builder type product. People aren't going to come to your product because they want to move around nodes and edges on a canvas or keep track of node states, and they don't care how your workflow engine is executing actions. What they care about is what they can do on your platform. And that's where triggers and actions come in. Triggers and actions are what nodes represent in your workflow builder. And these are the nodes that will automate some type of process for your users. That's why they'll keep coming back to your product to automate tasks that they can do in your platform that they can't do in others. So Copy AI is an example of a company that combines AI capabilities with a workflow builder product. In this example, they have a trigger that whenever a CRM is created in their user's HubSpot or Salesforce, it triggers this workflow that triggers an AI agent to scrape a website for a description and then sends that information through a Teams message. This is an example of a workflow builder that combines internal capabilities, such as they have a proprietary way that they're scraping a website for a description or creating copy or doing research, with third-party triggers and actions, such as when a lead is created or a Teams message comes in or sending a Teams message or enriching a CRM contact as well. This combination of internal and third-party actions is really powerful because your users probably aren't just using your platform, they're using your platform in conjunction with other third-party tools like Salesforce, like HubSpot, like Slack, like Notion, like Google Drive. And so your workflow builder product, if it's able to integrate with other third-party tools, it makes the automations that your users build that much more powerful. And so in our example that we built a workflow builder that has access to hundreds of third-party actions through an API called ActionKit. ActionKit is an API that provides thousands of actions across hundreds of integrations, such as Slack, Jira, GitHub, HubSpot, just to name a few. It includes all the inputs and descriptions of those inputs that you'll need for third-party actions in a workflow builder type product. I'll give a little demo here. In the Workflow Builder app that we built using React Flow and using the techniques that we talked about earlier in the article, we put together a playground that uses ActionKit with a couple different integrations that I'll demonstrate right now. So we'll add a trigger, and in this case, the trigger will be whenever our Slack app is mentioned. We'll add a couple nodes that are third-party actions. Maybe we want to search Notion pages, and then also search Jira issues, and then at the end, send a message in Slack. Each of our nodes will have node state and keep data that is relevant to that action. So in search pages, we can put an optional query to search for. For searching Jira issues, we can put some filtering on string matches, and then sending a direct message, we can specify the message as well as the recipient here. And so you might have noticed each of these nodes have inputs that need to go in for that action to run. These action descriptions are all provided via ActionKit, and when you call the ActionKit API to actually run the action, it takes all the inputs that you specified from different dropdowns and text inputs, and then calls the Slack API with auth fully managed by Paragon. And so it's a really easy way to include third-party integration actions in your workflow builder. Okay, let's hop back into the article. So after you put in your triggers and actions, you also want to add observability to workflow platforms. So I almost didn't add this section in, but when you give users the ability to create their own workflows, it opens the door to an infinite amount of possibilities. Users can now create crazy automations, and you've probably seen really cool ones that people have done on N8N, but you could also see that things can break on these automations. In the wrong hands, these automations can be very brittle, and if that's the case, you want users to be able to debug their own workflows before reaching out to your team for support, or reaching out to your CX team, or opening any tickets. So it's generally good practice to have some sort of debugging or observability tool in your workflow platform. You probably want the ability to see individual steps, maybe data coming in and out of those steps, as well as a task history of all the runs and all the workflows that have been executed by your users. So again, in our example, we have a sidebar that shows all the individual inputs and outputs for each action, as well as workflow history of deployed workflows. Similarly, Paragon itself has a workflow platform in addition to ActionKit, where we actually let people build automations between their product and their users' third-party SaaS platforms. And we have an observability platform called Task History, where we have logs as well as workflow runs that you can see on our Paragon dashboard if you sign up for a trial, and go to our task history tab. So wrapping up, the four pieces that you'll need for a workflow builder platform that lets your users build on top of are: you need to worry about your UI, and that's actually pretty easy with a library like React Flow or Svelte. You want to worry about how data is flowing in and out, and by that I mean keeping track of node and state changes on the client side and a workflow engine on the back end. Third, you want to think about the different triggers and actions that you want. You probably already have a good idea of your internal actions that you want to happen, such as your own internal APIs and different capabilities that your platform is capable of, but then also thinking about what sort of third-party integrations are necessary that your users will find useful. If you're a sales platform, you'll probably want to integrate with different CRMs. If you're an HR platform, you might want to integrate with other HR platforms or accounting platforms. And if you're a coding tool, maybe you want to integrate with Jira, with GitHub, and other coding platforms that your users are already on. And our last piece, when you allow your users to have infinite flexibility and build on top of your platform, you probably also want some sort of observability, auditing, or debugging tool where your users can keep track of workflow executions and debug their own issues when things inevitably pop up. So that's all we have for today's video on the ins and outs of a workflow builder product and how you can get started building your own. If you're interested in the full written tutorial that we just showed, please click on the full article in the description below. And if you like videos about integrations, AI, and how to build great products, please subscribe to Paragon and follow for more content. See you next time.